This is a brief tutorial about how to simplify a radical expression when the radicand, and again that's the number under the radical symbol, when that number is not a perfect square, but it does have a perfect square factor. Alright, so let's start with the square root of 48. We know 48 is not a perfect square, but it actually has three factors that are perfect squares. It's divisible by 1, which doesn't help us very much. It's divisible by 4, which is a perfect square. It's also divisible by 16. So in order to simplify a radical completely, we're going to need to factor out, which means divide. We're going to need to factor the radicand by its greatest perfect square factor. So that might sound confusing, but all I'm asking you to do is to think about what's its greatest perfect square factor, and then rewrite the radical expression as a product of two factors. So we know 48 is 16 times 3, that those quantities are equal. So since 48 is equal to 16 times 3, I could rewrite the square root of 48 as the square root of 16 times 3. All right, because these numbers are being multiplied, I can actually rewrite this as the square root of 16 times the square root of 3. Okay, so now here's the question. Do I know a whole number value for the square root of 16, or do I know a whole number value for the square root of 3? Well, we know the square root of 16 is 4. We don't know the square root of 3, or we at least know it's not a whole number. So I'm going to rewrite this as 4 times the square root of 3. And finally, I'm going to write this as 4 root 3. So I'm sorry, that's my cat meowing. That's Boomer. We can write this as 4 times the square root of 3. All right, let's take a look at one more example. Why don't you try this one with me? We have the square root of 242. And if we look at our list of perfect squares, I might recognize that it's divisible by 121. It's the same as saying 121 times 2. So again, first step, just like in the left column, we're going to rewrite the radical expression as the square root of 121 times 2. Then, I'm so sorry, my cat is so loud. Then we are going to rewrite that as the square root of 121 times the square root of 2. Now, we actually know the square root of 121, or we should know that it is 11 squared, 11 times 11. So, because I know this, I can now rewrite this as 11 times the square root of 2, and I can write my final answer as 11 root 2, or you might hear that said 11 radical 2. All right, this has been a brief tutorial. Feel free to re-watch it as many times as you need to as you're completing practice.